Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jermaine Collins. I'm a U.S. Army veteran and the lead organizer with Common Defense. Over this past weekend, 5 protesters were arrested by ICE and Border Patrol agents outside this Broadview ICE facility while exercising their First Amendment right to peaceful protest. Among those detained was 70-year-old Air Force veteran Dana Briggs. Shortly after his detainment, video surfaced of the events leading up to the moment he was detained. In the video, we see 70-year-old Dana pushed to the ground by what appeared to be a masked Border Patrol agent. This is yet another example of what continues to be a growing trend of ICE and supporting federal agencies escalating violence against peaceful protesters simply exercising their First Amendment right. Joining me today are representatives from Illinois Vets for Change, the ACLU, and other veterans and community members outraged by the increased presence of ICE in our communities and the use of the military in order to support these operations. Before we get to the other speakers, I want to discuss the impact of ICE operations in our neighborhoods. Just earlier this week, ICE agents were dropping from helicopters into Chicago neighborhoods and detaining men, women, and children alike without warrants. This is an unprecedented time. During ICE enforcement practices, we have not only seen a failure to distinguish between undocumented individuals and U.S. citizens, but we continue to see the practice of detaining and deporting our law-abiding, undocumented neighbors instead of the gangs of criminals this administration claimed were plaguing our street and used that as a justification for federal and military action in our neighborhoods. One of the most disturbing aspects of this policy is the detainment and deportation of undocumented veterans. Those who served and sacrificed for this country alongside of native-born and naturalized citizens. Veterans like U.S. Army veteran and legal resident of the United States, Marlon Paris, who self-deported to Trinidad months ago after being held for months in horrendous conditions in an ICE facility like the one behind me. Marlon's case is just one example of the broken and inhumane process we need to immediately, systematically change. And this all starts with taking ICE off of our streets and out of our communities. We have thank you. We have some great speakers today. Up next is the chair of Illinois Vets for Change and Army veteran Jesse Rojo.
Good morning, everybody. As it was just said, my name is Jesse Rojo, the chair of Illinois Veterans for Change, the largest democratic veteran organization in the state of Illinois. And it is our work, our mission, to reclaim and redefine that word patriotism. Because in the age of Trump, it has been perverted to becoming you love your country so much you hate your fellow Americans. Loving your country so much you hug the flag and then you turn your back on its very values. This is resulting in what we see now, where so-called patriots are turning a blind eye when they see mass deportation efforts tearing apart our community. Turning a blind eye when they see mass ICE agents and National Guard troops flooding our streets and numbing us to the reality that our civil rights, our democracy is being crushed day by day. That is not patriotism. To be a patriot means to love your country enough you're willing to roll up your sleeves and work to make it better. Willing to serve it in the military, as a teacher, as a first responder, as an advocate. To be a patriot is what we are seeing many do here today. Standing up, standing in solidarity, peacefully protesting and saying that what is happening is not okay. What is happening is not okay. Let us be clear in what is happening. We are seeing a so-called political leader. We're seeing our president in the White House pointing fingers, demonizing our immigrant communities, trying to rile up fear and hatred towards them so as to distract from releasing the Epstein files, so as to distract from our floundering economy, and so as to distract from our democracy being torn apart, and that is not okay, and that is why we stand in solidarity. That is why we protest peacefully. That is why we stand on the right side of history and say that this is not an issue of Democrats versus Republicans. This is an issue of those who will stand up and protect democracy and those who will turn a blind eye. So to those willing to stand, I thank you. To those driven by their true patriotism, who want a better America, I thank you. And to those who are hesitating, those who are seeing what is going on and still have not chosen a side, I understand, and I ask you, I beg of you, to do the right thing and to stand up for democracy. Thank you all so much. It is now my honor to introduce our next speaker, a woman who knows what it is to be a patriot, who knows what it is to serve her community, who knows what it is to fight for a better tomorrow for every child in every family in every community. A member of Illinois Veterans for Change, a candidate for 13th House District in Illinois, Demi Palachek.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for coming to here today and listening to veterans, because we often are forgotten about and not listened to. So my name is Demi Palachek. I am in the National Guard. I have been for 14 years and still counting. I'm a lifelong activist, a Latina, and a Chicagoan who is sick and tired of ICE ruining our streets. For the last month, I've stood outside Broadview Detention Center every Friday, protesting alongside families and neighbors. Week after week, I watch little kids come up to the detention center with their siblings looking for their parents, only to find them knocking on the doors and them slamming the door on their face. But that's why I keep coming back, because no one in America should be treated like this. Every week, ICE escalates violence against us, peaceful protesters exercising our First Amendment rights. At first, they just ripped up our signs, but then they started shoving people and throwing us to the ground. Then came into the mob tactics, full-on tackles, dragging people away. They know that they can't arrest us just simply for protesting. So instead, they drag us away onto their property and give us felonies for trespassing. That's how they're silencing us. 2 weeks ago, I was grabbed, bruised, and shot with pepper spray, and then tear gas with canisters, simply for helping another peaceful protester. Last week, snipers on the top of the building flooded the entire block, not only against peaceful protests, clergy, but also neighbors and children. ICE has no regard for any human life. And let me be clear, these are not trained professionals. As a military member, I can tell you the way they are handling weapons is reckless and dangerous. I've seen ICE agents with fingers on their trigger, using real M16s, M9s, pointing them at people. They're just trigger happy, and there's no trigger discipline. They don't understand the deployment of trigger gas that they're doing, and also this level of escalation and incompetence, people will die. And for what? 70% of detained and no criminal record? Only 7% have a criminal violent past, and that's not even about removing criminals. If it was, then we wouldn't be at ICE, or we wouldn't be protesting here. ICE wouldn't be raiding schools at the drop-off line, workplaces, or families, or homes. This was never about lowering costs. It was never about energy or healthcare or groceries. This is to help billionaires. This is about scapegoating. It's about the immigrants used as political rods while private prison companies cash in away and while taking away our civil rights. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection to all persons, not just citizens. Yet today, journalists, peaceful protesters, and Latino communities are being profiled, beaten, and arrested for standing up for how they are just living. They want us to be afraid, and they want to divide us, because if they can strip one group from their rights, they can strip all of us from our rights. I keep thinking back when I was in school, learning about Germany in 1930. I always wondered how ordinary people would just stay silent. I told myself as a child, I would have spoken up, I would have acted, I would have done something. Well, now is that moment. It's happening again, right now in 2025. So I'm asking everyone listening, if you believe that you would have stood up to fascism back then, I need you to prove it now. To my fellow veterans and service members, remember your oath is to the people, not to politicians or fascists. We swore to defend the nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. If our government turns its power against the innocent, then it's our duty to stand with the people. Thank you.
Condemn all political violence. Political violence, people breaking flags, tearing flags out of hands, people throwing water on protesters, people throwing ice on people, people chasing people. Why? Because they have an opposing political viewpoint. That's things that happen here. People are not innocent. You have agitators. You have people who are violent.
You are the agitator. You are the agitator.
You have people who are violent. You have people who are not peaceful.
But you are not peaceful.
When you have a flag that's broken in half, and because they want to rip the flag out of your hand, you have people who throw water on you, you have people who throw ice on you, you have people who chase you and try to swing at you. That's violent.
So let's not.
That's not violent. That's not peaceful.
So this is an agitator, and he's been coming here and hurting people and screaming at people. He even went against elected officials.
If you support the First Amendment right as you claim, then I can stand here and voice my opinion just as much as you can. You cannot rip an American flag out of somebody's hand. You cannot break the American flag. That's shameful. That's disgraceful. That should never happen in this country. That is violence. That's hateful rhetoric, and that's something that you should not.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce the next veteran who actually serves our country and does something for our country. It's Dylan Balhoff.
God bless America. USA, USA, USA.
Hi, my name's Dylan Blaha. I'm a U.S. Army veteran and also a veteran of the Illinois Army National Guard. And today I'm here to talk about my concerns over the rapid authoritarianism in our country. Early warning signs of fascism include powerful and continuing nationalism, a disdain for human rights, an identification of enemies as a unifying cause. There's also supremacy of the military, controlled mass media, rampant sexism, and obsession with national security. Over the past few months, President Trump has slowly normalized the use of the military in American cities. First, in June, he illegally deployed the California National Guard to Los Angeles to stand in front of a few federal buildings in order to waste $120 million taxpayer dollars, while scaring the American public in the process. Then in August, Trump activated the D.C. National Guard under a false crime narrative. Shortly after, he threatened to deploy the National Guard to the streets of Chicago. On Saturday, he told Pete Hegseth to deploy the military to, quote, war-ravaged Portland, and he told them to use, quote, full force. This is what authoritarians do. Crime is not up in major American cities. It's down. This isn't about crime, though. This is a power grab. On Tuesday, he suggested to a room full of military generals and admirals that the U.S. military could use cities like Chicago as a training ground. He told our top military leaders to prepare for a war against an enemy from within. Last week, he also signed a directive called NSPM 7 to criminalize speaking out against the government. The U.S. military is not a law enforcement force. Federalized forces cannot serve as domestic law enforcement under the Posse Comitatus Act unless the president declares an insurrection. National Guard deployed under state orders can sometimes assist local law enforcement, but our leaders aren't asking for it. With every military deployment, our president slides the Overton window further to the right. Things that once seemed unthinkable and radical now seem acceptable or even sensible. Our president's actions have dismantled established norms that limit the military's role in domestic affairs. Organizations like the ACLU and the Brennan Center have warned that deploying the military against civilians poses an intolerable threat to individual liberty and is dangerous for American democracy. Let's call it like it is. Our president wants to use the U.S. military as his personal police force to target his political enemies and our immigrant communities. I wish I had all the answers, but I don't. All military service members must disobey unlawful orders, so I ask our military leaders to start there. To everyone else, it's important to note how abnormal this moment is. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone who will listen. This is not normal, and we cannot allow the presence of the U.S. military and ICE in our cities to become the new normal. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Ed Yanka of the ACLU.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Ed, E-D. Last name is Yanka, Y-O-H-N-K-A. I'm the Director of Communications and Public Policy for the ACLU of Illinois. On behalf of the ACLU, I am proud to stand here with these veterans today and to really call out, as you just heard, that what we're seeing both here in Broadview, across Chicago, and across the country is not normal, and we should not treat it as such. Let me say a couple of words about Chicago to begin. First of all, Chicago has a great tradition of protests and speaking out. If you've lived here for 15 minutes, you know that we have a protest of some sort or another virtually every day. One walks up and down Michigan Avenue or past Daly or Federal Plaza and sees people fully engaged in their First Amendment rights. And it doesn't take folks in camouflage shooting chemical agents and pellets at people to disperse them. That's not what we do in Chicago. Here's the other thing about our city and about our community. We have problems, and we're working on them. And the last thing that we need to help with any of those problems is any sort of military force, including the National Guard, to come in here at the direction of Donald Trump. The reality is that Donald Trump doesn't like Chicago. And he doesn't like Chicago not because he's got a building here. It's not because there are people here whom he has some grievance with over anything else other than the fact that the majority of voters and the majority of elected people in this city do not support this immigration policy. That is why Chicago is on the list to be targeted with this kind of deployment. So in closing, let me just say it is incredibly dangerous to see the military used in a domestic situation like this. It is dangerous that a president thinks that it's a training ground for lethal force to be used in a city and in a major urban area in the United States. And it is disturbing to see a president who believes that sweeping people up off the street with military force somehow makes our country greater. We're better than this, and we need to speak out. Thank you all very much.
Thank you again for joining us this morning. We're going to give a few minutes to let folks ask questions, so our speakers can answer some questions. So wanted to see if we had any questions in the crowd right now.
Yeah, Dana, would you like to say something?
I'm sorry?
Would the veteran, anybody like to say something?
So Dana Briggs is not with us today. He's not with us today.
Do you know where he is or why he's not?
So Dana was advised not to come to this facility. He has an ongoing investigation, so we want to leave the investigation be for now. Any other questions for any of our speakers? All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope that members of the press will speak to some of the protesters and folks on the side. Really get the lay of the land out here. The community has been very clear. The community does not want this ICE facility here. The community does not want ICE in the streets of Chicago, and the community does not want the National Guard in the streets of Chicago. Common Defense stands with the members of this community and veterans as we speak out against these inhumane deportations and detainment of our undocumented and also sometimes documented neighbors. Thank you again.
She thought because she pulled that motherfucking gun out, we was gonna. She thought because she pulled that motherfucking gun out, we was gonna. She thought because she pulled that motherfucking gun out, we was gonna.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Inspire our lawmakers to be instruments of your purposes. As the shutdown continues, may they humbly seek to do what is best for our nation and world, achieving together what cannot be done without allies. Lord, give them the wisdom to see that there is a practical morality based on absolutes that they should follow. Remind them that they are accountable to you for their thoughts, words, and deeds. May they speak truth as you give them the ability to comprehend it, finding workable solutions to challenging problems. We pray in your magnificent name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., October 2, 2025. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Pete Ricketts, a senator from the state of Nebraska, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Chuck Grassley, President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of S.Res. 412, which the clerk will report.
Executive Calendar Number 2, S.Res. 412, Executive Resolution authorizing the en bloc consideration in executive session of certain nominations on the executive calendar.
quorum? Okay. Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are into the second day of a government shutdown after Democrats once again rejected a clean, nonpartisan funding bill to keep the government open while we continue bipartisan appropriations work. We're not going to be voting today as we have Jewish colleagues who are currently observing Yom Kippur. But we're going to be voting tomorrow. And we're going to give my Democrat colleagues another opportunity to reopen the government by passing the clean, nonpartisan funding extension before us. Mr. President, I realize that my Democrat colleagues are facing pressure from members of their far-left base, but they're playing a losing game here. A robust majority of American voters are against a government shutdown. Even some Democrat members are raising concerns, with a Democrat House member noting yesterday, and I quote, "This government shutdown is a result of hardball politics driven by the demands far-left groups are making for Democrat Party leaders to put on a show of their opposition to President Trump. The shutdown is hurting Americans and our economy. Normal policy disagreements are no reason to subject our constituents to the continued harm of this shutdown," end quote. That, Mr. President, from a Democrat House member. Organizations ranging from the National Fraternal Order of Police to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to the Teamsters have spoken out against shutting down the government. The Teamsters president said Tuesday, and I quote, "A shutdown will hurt working people, period. Senators should pass the House-passed clean, short-term funding bill," end quote. Senators should pass the House-passed clean, short-term funding bill, end quote. That, Mr. President, again, from the president of the Teamsters. Clean, Mr. President, is what he said. My Democrat colleagues have little to work with in this debate, with their own previous statements working against them. And so they've tried to portray the clean, nonpartisan funding bill before us as something other than what it is. But the Teamsters president reminds us of the facts. We are not asking Democrats to swallow a list of new Republican policies or partisan demands. Not in there. We are asking Democrats to do nothing more than pass a clean, nonpartisan bill to fund the government for a few more weeks so that we can get back to bipartisan appropriations work. And I said, Mr. President, bipartisan appropriations work. The kind of bipartisan work that has seen the Senate pass 3 appropriations bills so far by robust bipartisan margins. The kind of work that we want to continue once Democrats have stopped holding government funding hostage to a long list of partisan demands. Mr. President, so far, 3 of our Democrat colleagues have joined Republicans to attempt to reopen the government. If we can just find a few more Democrats to join us, we can end this shutdown and get back to bipartisan appropriations work and the business of the American people. Democrats voted for clean CRs like the one before us 13 times. 13 times during the Biden administration. I hope they'll join us to pass this clean CR and reopen the government for hardworking Americans. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum. I would withdraw that quorum.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, here we are. Day number 2 of the Schumer shutdown. Or should we call this the AOC shutdown? After all, when the puppet master gets outmaneuvered by his own radical squad, who's really calling the shots? Shouldn't we give the squad some credit here for this shutdown? Now, let me say that a different way. This Democrat shutdown is nothing but a cynical political shutdown, with Senator Schumer kowtowing to his radical left-wing extremists. He's desperately recoiling, fighting to stave off a primary and to save his party from the piranhas in their own midst. Look, I'm sure he feels like he's been steamrolled by President Trump and the overwhelming America First mandate from 78 million American patriots who voted for real change. Everything else, all of their excuses, is just a pathetic smokescreen to hide their failures. But let's take a closer look at some of these Democrat excuses. Again, they're decoys, they're camouflage, and why this is indeed a Schumer shutdown. First of all, there's no substance to their arguments. They want to talk about health care. Boy, do Republicans want to fix health care. But the real problem is the cost of health care. Health care has went up 400% in the last couple of decades. It's the cost of health care. All my Democrat friends want to do is just keep throwing more and more money, more and more subsidies, making big health care systems rich. Premiums are going to go up 20% this year. 20%. Again, health care is what's leading inflation. If it wasn't for health care inflation, we'd probably be down closer to 2%. So regardless of what happens here in Congress in the next 3 to 4 months, your health care premium is going to go up 20% on average. This shutdown is keeping us from working on the real problem, and that's the cost of health care. Think about Republican solutions that we have out there right now. We have a legislation we call a price tags bill that we hope to debate and mark up in our health care committee this fall. What that bill does is it forces every hospital, surgery center, imaging center to put a price tag on the procedures you're going to have done. Could you imagine walking into a restaurant and not knowing the price of a good Kansas steak versus some cheap grade steak from another country? You couldn't imagine that. So when you're sitting there deciding whether to have your hip replaced at a hospital like in my hometown of Great Bend, America, versus having it done at another facility, you'll see that you can have the same procedure done for maybe a fifth at a cost at other facilities. And by the way, we have better outcomes. We have better customer service as well. So patients deserve price tags. You know, other solutions out there are expanding healthcare savings accounts where you can use pre-tax dollars for different opportunities as well. And then if you really want me to solve the riddle of cost of healthcare, we need to make America healthier again. And that's why Republicans under President Trump, Secretary Kennedy, were trying to pass policies which would lead to a healthier America. Think about it, 70% of Americans have a chronic disease. You know, you think about heart disease and hypertension, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, and mental health issues. 90% of the healthcare dollars being spent in this country are spent on those chronic diseases. You think about our youth. 20% of our youth are on a prescription drug. 30% are obese. 40% of our youth have a chronic disease. We have a mental health epidemic in our youth as well. So if you want me to drive down the cost of health care, we need to make a healthier America. We need more transparency. We need to promote innovation. We need to turn patients into consumers again. And then lastly, and most importantly, we need to make America healthy again. And for all the right reasons. You know, the benefit of driving down the cost of health care is just one of them. Think about this. America is spending 18% of its GDP on health care right now. Singapore is spending 4%. Most advanced countries are going to spend half of what we do on health care. People ask, well, why are our outcomes worse? It's because we're sick. We have sicker people. The incidence of diabetes, of hypertension, all those things going through the roof. That's why our outcomes aren't as good as other countries are. Rural health care. Let's talk about rural health care for a second. My goodness, do I care about rural health care. I was born in a rural hospital. I had an OB practice for 25 years in rural America. I was on call every day, every other day for 25 years. You can call my wife and ask her that we didn't sleep through the night for 25 years. We delivered a baby most every day. And then I was blessed to lead a group of doctors and run that rural hospital for over a decade as well. I oversaw 3 health departments. If anybody understands the importance of rural health care, I think it would be me. And that's why I've spent a lifetime trying to fix all these riddles that we have right now. Now, my friends across the aisle say they're worried that rural hospitals are closing all of a sudden, and they want to try to fix this issue. Well, they've actually, contributed to the problem. But here's one of the most hypocritical things I've ever heard since being up here. So the Democrats say that they're closing the government because they want to save rural hospitals. But the first thing they're going to do is take $50 billion away from our rural health transformation funding. $50 billion rural health transformation funding, something that I've been working on with this administration since the New Year's, what that would look like if we were able to have the money. But no, what my friends across the aisle want to do, they want to control health care. They want to keep throwing good money after bad money. They think that Medicaid's going to save the day. Let me tell you something about Medicaid. Only 5% of Medicaid funding goes to rural America. 5% of Medicaid funding goes to rural America. Hospitals, doctors lose money on every Medicaid patient we see. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't take care of them. We took care of everybody in our hospital, regardless of their ability to pay, regardless if they were a citizen, not a citizen. We didn't know. We didn't care. We went in and took care of these patients. But certainly, running a private OB practice and running a hospital, I realized that we lose money on every Medicaid patient we see. And having Medicaid is not the same as access to health care. Who in the world even thinks that could be the case? Talk to any doctor, talk to any patient that has Medicaid. Ask them, let's say that they've got a herniated disc in their back. Ask them how long it's going to take to get in to see a neurosurgeon. It's going to take 6 months, it's going to take a year. So in reality, probably less than half of doctors in a true measure participate in Medicaid. It's got to be the most failed system, the biggest waste of money I've ever seen. There are better solutions out there than Medicaid. I'm so excited about, again, solutions. Republicans have solutions. I'm so excited about this transformation fund and the opportunity that does that. Here's what's really rich. Here's what's rich. So there are hospitals closing and pharmacies closing today, tomorrow, last year. But that's a result of the Democrats' failed policies. Our legislation that we passed this year, signature legislation that's going to change the course of America, none of that's going to really kick in for 2 or 3 years. It is just beyond me for the leader of the Democrat Party to sit up here and cry about hospitals closing in rural America today and blaming Republicans. If there's any hospital closing today, tomorrow, next year, the Democrats own it. They own the failed policy, and America gets that. My gosh, I've never heard something so ridiculous in my life. But again, Republicans have solutions, and we want to fix it. One of the ways to fix the failure of why these hospitals are failing is the economy, that hospitals, rural hospitals, are a reflection of the local economy. As agriculture goes, so goes rural America, so goes these hospitals. And by the way, 97% of these rural counties voted for President Trump. He's never going to turn his back on them. We as Republicans are not going to turn our back on him. I wake up every morning trying to figure out, how do we save rural hospitals and rural America? How do we recruit doctors to rural America? How do we recruit nurses to rural America? And all of a sudden, the Democrats have got salvation here, and they care about it? No, they're hiding behind that issue. They are hiding behind it because they don't have any substance to stand on. Again, the ACA has been the rule of the land for 15 years now. If there's any hospitals failing today, and there are, It's because of the overregulation of the ACA. Just like banks consolidating, hospitals consolidating, healthcare consolidating, all these different entities are consolidating because of overregulation created by Democrats. Our rural transformation funding is going to set those rural counties free to do what they think is best with the money. All right, let's go to the next Democrat argument. Let's talk about these COVID-era subsidies for the ACA plans. What a joke. What just absolutely cannot believe they're going to hide behind this one. So think back to the original ACA. So the ACA sets up funding to help supplement insurance premiums for a group of people based upon their ability to pay. So, and that's probably 70–80% of the premium right now on average, is the way it was set up to be. In some cases, it was 95%. But then COVID comes along, and the Democrats boost those subsidies, so that now that many Americans aren't contributing anything to those particular funds. And what this has led to is mass fraud, okay? So these COVID-era subsidies have led to mass fraud. Let me put some dollars and cents on this. When the ACA was first written, they thought we'd be spending maybe $25–50 billion a year on these subsidies. Well, we're spending $150 billion a year on these subsidies. We think that probably a third of that is waste, fraud, and abuse. And I could spend the next half hour talking about why indeed there's waste, fraud, and abuse there within it. But the way it was created allows for waste, fraud, and abuse. I can't fix that today. I can't fix it tomorrow. We need to fund the government and get back to work on this issue. And we know how to do it. But for Republicans that agree to these subsidies be continued, the first thing we got to do is to address the fraud. And I bet that's a 90-10 issue. I bet that 90% of Americans would like for us to fix the fraud in that issue and make sure the people who need it the most are getting the help. So that's one issue on the COVID-era subsidies. The next big issue, I want to go back to the premiums, okay? That's the real issue. These premiums are going to go up 20% this year. So regardless of, again, what we do here, the premiums are going to go up 20%. That's where the sting is coming from, is how much these premiums are going up. And my friends across the aisle just want to keep throwing money at it. They want this corporate welfare where these subsidies are basically enriching big insurance companies. That's exactly what's happening. These subsidies are basically going to this consolidated insurance business out there. Most states like mine only have 2 or 3 insurance carriers left standing. And then when these subsidies go up for the people in the ACA plan, guess what? They're going to use that as an excuse to increase your plan that you're getting through that hardworking job of yours as well. So to have a meaningful discussion about these COVID-era subsidies, we need to, number one, is to address the fraud, and number two is we need to address the rate of increase of these premiums as well. And listen to this. Even if this COVID subsidy went away, the federal government on average would be paying 80% of the premium. So we'd be paying 80% rather than 90% of the premium. But if it's gone up, if the premium's gone up 20%, just think about the difference on 80% versus 90%. That's where the sting is truly coming from. When do Democrats want to have a serious conversation about this? The real conversation about the cost of health care. My friends across the aisle want to bring these two issues together. They want to, take a hostage. In order to keep the government open, they're saying you've got to give us these COVID-era subsidies to prolong them. But they're supposed to expire December 31st of this year. The Democrats passed this. It was supposed to be for COVID. And like all the other COVID subsidies that drove us into massive debt, there was a sunset on them. They wrote the law. If they didn't want it to sunset, why didn't they continue the program for infinity, just like they did with the original subsidies? So this, to me, is two different issues. We have the issue here of keeping the government open, and we have the issue here of health care. And I want to take care of both of them, but it's going to take weeks, probably months, for us to come up with a solution for these COVID subsidies. So I don't think it's fair to keep the government closed down because they weren't willing to talk about this. You know, it's interesting that, you know, we didn't hear a thing about this, at least I didn't, from the minority leader, that he was concerned about this till just a couple of days ago, again, which makes me think he wanted the shutdown. He wanted the shutdown to appease his liberal left base. Here's another argument the Democrats are making. You know, there's a fight about health care for illegal aliens. And I don't think anyone can argue that before our working families tax cut bill, our signature bill that's going to grow the economy, that before that legislation that illegal aliens were getting health care. Even the CBO, and I hate to pick and choose when I use the CBO numbers, but the CBO said, you know, 2 million illegal aliens were getting health care subsidies or free health care because of the loose, just unfettered process that states were using to verify who was eligible for Medicaid. That's not me, that's not a Republican. So the CBO said 2 million illegal aliens were getting care each year on the backs of American taxpayers. And I don't know if that number's perfectly accurate, but if it's 1 million, is it 2 million or 3 million, certainly illegal aliens were getting free health care on the backs of American taxpayers. So when the Democrats want to go in there and gut that bill and end the fixes, the loopholes we closed, I don't know how they can look America in the eye and say that that's not the case. But regardless, I think that's a small issue. I think that's a red herring. That's not really what the issue is. There's just one more thing they can argue about to get America's eyes off the true challenge within their own party. The minority leader says we're not negotiating. I just think that's such an untruth, that we're not negotiating. My gosh, the Appropriations Committee, Republican-led Appropriations Committee, has been negotiating since President Trump, well, actually since we were sworn in January. And just nothing but compliments to Senator Susan Collins and her team and the Democrats on the appropriations team. They're doing their job. But Leader Schumer, Minority Leader Schumer, wants to do this negotiation in the back doors. He wants to continue the status quo where for the government funding, they go back in behind a door in a closed office, the cameras are off, and they want to cut a deal. You talked about the four corners up here, the Speaker of the House, Minority Leader in the House, Minority Leader in the Senate, and then the Majority Leader, the head of the Senate here, of course, John Thune. So Senator Schumer thinks they can go behind closed doors, and there's 2 New Yorkers in that room, and build all their bridges to nowhere. But Republicans want to fund the government in open daylight through the Appropriations Committee with the lights on, the cameras on. The Appropriations Committee passes legislation. There's 12 buckets of funding to fund this discretionary spending that Senate Republicans are trying to lead here. 12 buckets of funding. Again, under great leadership, they have passed 8 of these 12 buckets out of committee. Now, almost 90% of funding for the federal government discretionary spending, again, of course, that they've already finished the job. Senator Collins has done an incredible job getting it through committee, bipartisan. I mean, you look at the votes on these bills, it's like 25-0, 23-2, 24-1. Huge bipartisan victories done in the light of day, and then those should come here to the floor and let America see exactly what's in them. And if there's a bridge to nowhere in there, let me stand up here and offer an amendment to strike that funding. And then let that senator defend why his or her state should have this bridge to nowhere. That's what's supposed to happen, the light of day. But Senator Schumer wants to go back to the dark ages where he can go in a back room, a back New York room, and then cut a deal for all of his bridges to nowhere. The House, I believe, have passed all 12 of their funding bills out of committee. Now, we've got 3 of those across the floor. There's 5 more sitting there, but Senator Schumer refuses to release anybody on his side to vote for him, even though they voted for them in committee. Why? It's part of the political theater. He wants this shutdown. So I think, America sees this, that we want to negotiate in good faith. But Senator Schumer's idea of negotiating is now to go behind closed doors, where he's one of 4 people in the room, and then go tell the president, who was elected by 28 million people, wants to tell him what to do. So I asked, as we go through this process, I asked myself this morning, so what are AOC and the squad, who are empowered by the liberal legacy media, asking Senator Schumer to do, or really telling him what to do? What are AOC, the squad, the liberal media, what are they demanding from Senator Schumer? Well, they told him to take a hostage, right? So he did. He took a hostage. He took these COVID-era subsidies as hostage and the $1.5 trillion of added funding as hostage. And now they're asking him to shoot the hostage. So the squad and Senator Schumer, they took the bait. They took the bait hook, line, and sinker. Like jumping into Brer Rabbit's briar patch. And guess what? They're about to get mowed down like dry corn stalks in a Kansas tornado. They took the bait. They took the bait, empowering the White House to finally shrink this federal government, this monster of a beast that we have here now. When Joe Biden was sworn in 2021, there was about 2.8 million federal employees. So President Biden started 2.8 million. By the time he finished, we had over 3 million federal employees. Now, President Trump has kind of split the difference there. So we're still not back to pre-COVID, pre-Biden levels of federal employment. Look, I'm grateful for every federal employee, and many of them do incredible work. But I think it's no secret that we could all be a little more efficient, that we all could work a little harder. And if we had a few less regulations, I think we would need a few less federal employees as well. I don't want to be, sound calloused or not caring. I'm grateful for every job an American has, but my goal would be to help move these people with some of these federal jobs and move them into the real world and adding to GDP rather than subtracting from GDP. That would be my goal. There's a reasonable number of people we need to do the work of the federal government, but I just think that going from 2.8 million pre-COVID to over 3 million just seems to be too much. So, like I said, the squad has led the Democrat Party into Brer Rabbit's briar patch, and they're about to get mowed down like corn stalks in a Kansas twister. I think the last thing I want to go back to here is the Democrats are saying that they really want to add $1.5 trillion to our debt. Again, we have $37 trillion of national debt now as a nation. We're spending almost $3 billion a day on interest. That's right, America, $3 billion a day on interest alone, $1 trillion a year, and they want to add $1.5 trillion to our national debt. But get this, in November of this last year, America rejected that plan, okay? That's why the voters gave Republicans the White House, the House, and the Senate. They didn't want us to borrow another $1.5 trillion. So what's motivating the squad? What's motivating Senator Schumer to do this, to shut down the government? What's motivating their lust for power and their control of the American people? I think the socialists have always thought if you control health care, that's the first step in controlling the people, right? So what's motivating them? I think number one is let's just be frank here, it's Trump derangement syndrome. I think that's their number one motivation to shut the government down, is Trump derangement syndrome. They have a hatred for President Trump that I've never seen anything like this before in my life. I think the second reason is the liberal left has not realized they lost the election. You know, you go through these stages of grief, and denial is the first one. The liberals still have not realized they lost the election. 78 million people voted for Republicans to control the House, the Senate, and the White House, that they're rejecting the Democrats' lust for power to control Americans, to borrow from our grandchildren. So that's their motivation. Look, if they want to change these policies, then go win the election. If you want to change the policies, go win the election. You know, I think back to 2020. And the Democrats had a sweep, right? The Democrats swept the elections in 2020, and they added $2 trillion a year of debt. So they grew the budget from about $5 trillion to $7 trillion overnight. But when it came to keeping the government open, the Republicans didn't go back to them and say, hey, we're going to keep the government open if you decrease your spending by $2 trillion a year. We didn't take that hostage. We could have. We could have. Does that make the sense comparing 2020 election to this election? The Democrats swept in 2020. They came in and added $2 trillion of spending. But over a dozen times, Republicans walked the plank and said, we'll keep the government open. I wasn't happy about that then. I'm not happy about it now. I'm not happy about the spending levels that we're fighting for right now. I think that they're way too much. If you want to continue your liberal socialist policies, Democrats, go win an election. Go win an election. We came through with a bill for America to cut taxes, to grow jobs, to make the government more efficient. And look what's happening. You know, the gas prices are down, grocery prices are down, the border's secure. All those types of things are happening under Republican leadership. We want to address the cost of health care. We truly, truly do. I want to point out that we're just not going to negotiate borrowing another $1.5 trillion or continued throwing money at health care issues in order to keep the government open. Again, this is apples and oranges. We need to open the government back. We need to fund the government for a couple months, a clean CR, let Senator Collins and her team, working with Democrats, get that other 10% of funding across the finish line. In 2 months' time, we can bring those bills to the floor in front of the American public, debate them, offer amendments, make senators defend their bridges to nowhere, as I call them, and then continue the work on health care. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be painful. When $5 trillion is being spent on health care in this country every year, and all these big corporations are grabbing that money as it goes by their front desk, it's not going to be easy to drive down the cost of health care, but we have to do it. To me, this is common sense. We're asking the Democrats to vote for a clean CR based upon levels of spending that every Senate Democrat in here that was in office voted for just 7 months ago. 7 months ago, every Democrat in here voted for these spending limits. Again, a dozen times under Joe Biden, Republicans walked that plank and kept the government open. I pledge to every Democrat, no one's going to work harder than I will to help solve this riddle for health care, focused on driving the cost of health care down. But at the end of the day, this shutdown keeps us from doing the real work of the people, from having real debates about the cost of health care, our national debt, our spending, all those things. During a shutdown, things freeze up here. And we can't do the work that we need to do in our committees to address these different problems. One of our presidents once said this, and I'm going to quote him. I know that it's said that one of the easiest things in the world is to give away somebody else's money. But government does not have money except the money it takes from people. And so every time we talk about spending money on this or that program, on health care or COVID subsidies, let's remember that the government has no money except what it takes from the people. And the people know that, and they're feeling it. They're feeling the pain of the government taking so much money. That's my quote. Go back to the president's quote here. And the people are tired of big government taking all the money they earn. Boy, if you're a senator up here and you're listening to anybody back home, I think you understand folks back home are tired of big government taking all the money they can earn. So I ask my friends across the aisle, and they truly are friends. There's not an enemy. There's not a Democrat I would call an enemy. President Reagan said he had no political enemy, only political opponents. You know, no different than we see gladiators on Sunday playing these football games, and at the end of the game, they're shaking each other's hands. Both parties should fight for what they think is right. But if we stay fixed on the goals, the common goals, working towards a balanced budget, keeping the government open, driving down the cost of health care, all these things, I bet most of us agree on those goals. But in the meantime, we need to keep the government open. We need to pass a clean CR. Again, let's let the Appropriations Committee continue their negotiation to do their job as we all work together up here. So as long as we stay on those same goals of like I said, we want to keep the government open, we want to work towards a balanced budget. I want to fix health care, I want to fix the cost of health care. Anyone up here that agrees on those same goals, I'll reach out my hand across the aisle and I pledge that we'll listen and work together in good faith. But for today, let's pass a clean CR. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President?
The senator from Nebraska.
The government is shut down today. And the responsibility lies squarely on the minority leader and the Democrats. In fact, you could call it his shutdown. Republicans have offered a clean continuing resolution that would keep government open to allow us to continue working on the appropriations process. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have called foul. Somehow this is unfair, that we ought to have a negotiation. In fact, they are demanding more than $1 trillion in new spending to be able to keep government open for just 7 weeks. They want money for illegal immigrants to get health care. They want more subsidies for the pandemic-era insurance. They want to end the rural health care fund that Republicans put in place for our rural hospitals. They demand all of this, saying the clean continuing resolution that we've offered is not sufficient. Hypocrisy. This is hypocrisy. 13 times in the Biden administration, Democrats voted for a continuing resolution. 4 times, they have voted for this exact level of spending, this budget, 4 times in the last 18 months. In fact, I've got a chart here that shows the percentage of Democrat senators who supported these continuing resolutions. And you can see the numbers are almost 100% all the way across. And when it's not 100%, it's 98%. The minority leader himself voted for this very continuing resolution 4 times in a row before this case. Hypocrisy. They are putting these unreasonable, radical left demands in front of us instead of keeping government open. Let me share with you a quote from our minority leader. In 2013, he said, "What if I persuaded my caucus to say, I'm not going to pay our bills unless I get my way? It's a politics of idiocy, of confrontation, of paralysis." Further, the minority leader said in January 2024, "Passing the CR, of course, will prevent a harmful and unnecessary government shutdown. No reasonable member on either side, Democrat or Republican, wants a government shutdown. Both sides recognize that a government shutdown would mean crushing delays to veterans programs, delays to nutrition programs for women, infants, and children, delayed benefits for our military, and so much more." Now, as I mentioned, the Democrats have said this is about health care. But let me read you a quote from the junior senator from Connecticut. He said, when talking about health care, that there is a time and a place to debate health care, but not when the funding of the federal government and all the lives that are impacted by it hang in the balance. The hypocrisy of the minority leader of the Democrats is breathtaking. It's stunning. During the Biden administration, they were happy to pass continuing resolutions. Happy to. And in fact, when given the very same continuing resolution they voted yes on 4 times in a row, now they say no for partisan political reasons driven by the radical left wing. And again, they say they want to make this about health care. How disingenuous. First of all, let's examine the COVID subsidies that they want. First of all, they're the COVID subsidies. These are pandemic subsidies meant for a pandemic. Folks, newsflash, the pandemic's been over for 4 years. The Democrats were the ones who set the expiration date on it. And the Democrats, if they were so concerned about this, had all of last year to bring it up and address it and extend it once again if they had chosen to. They chose not to. All of a sudden, crying about these subsidies now just smacks of hypocrisy. And as I just read you the junior senator rather, from Connecticut's remark, when it suited them before, they didn't want to talk about health care when they were talking about continuing resolutions and government shutdowns. Folks, this shutdown does mean that folks in my home state of Nebraska could see services diminished. It could mean that, for example, Social Security offices may be understaffed. Social Security checks are going to go out, but services may be diminished. Women and children will not be able to enroll in the WIC program. The person who's supposed to help with IRS questions is not available. National parks may be closed. All these services may be degraded. And all because the Democrats are holding the American public and Nebraskans in my state hostage for their radical left demands. The Democrats should do what they have done 13 times under the Biden administration: vote for a continuing resolution, help us continue our work on appropriations, because that's the way the system is supposed to work. We've already passed 3 bipartisan appropriation bills. The Appropriations Committee has more bipartisan bills ready to work on. This could all be over if the Democrats will simply vote for a continuing resolution that they have already voted yes on 4 times over the last 18 months and 13 times during the Biden administration. If the American public is looking for answers, they have to look no further than the Democrats to find out who is responsible for this. Republicans have offered this continuing resolution and have voted for it. And in fact, 3 Democrats have voted for the continuing resolution, including an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. So we will continue to do our part by voting for this continuing resolution and continuing to put it up to give the Democrats a chance to get government back open so we can continue the people's business and work on these appropriation bills, which is what we are supposed to be doing. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Thank you. Mr. President, I rise today as millions of Americans stand on the edge of a healthcare cliff. And I join my Democratic colleagues in continuing to fight to reopen the government and to prevent Americans' healthcare costs from skyrocketing. A critical part of the governing is finding common ground. You don't always pick your neighbors, as the presiding officer knows, if we have worked together many, many years. But you find a way to live next to your neighbors, as we do, and to work with them. Making healthcare more affordable should be a bipartisan issue. And some of my Republicans know we need to act, Republican colleagues know that we need to act and we need to get something done. And the overwhelming majority of Americans agree. I've worked that way in the Senate. For a number of years, I was ranked #1 for bipartisan bills and #3 for passing bills into law, because when we sit down together to work things out, we can get things done. Courage is about willing to stand next to someone you don't always agree with for the betterment of this country. And that means finding some common ground. It doesn't mean saying my way or the highway. It doesn't mean, when you're the President of the United States, canceling meetings, doing one at the last minute, and then with the Democratic leaders of our country putting up a deep fake video that was incredibly offensive, poking at them, instead of taking this issue seriously. They came to him in good faith and still do. Unfortunately, right now, our Republican colleagues are not working with us to find a bipartisan agreement to prevent the government shutdown and address the healthcare crisis. We know that even when they float ideas, which we surely do appreciate, in the end, the president appears to make the call. He made the call on tariffs, even though so many of our Republican colleagues disagree with him on that. He made the call on certain nominees like RFK Jr. He made the call when it came to certain of the provisions in the big, beautiful betrayal of the bill, many of which our colleagues didn't like, including the nutrition program decision at the end to reward the 10 states with the highest error rate when it comes to SNAP. I note none of them are in the Midwest. That is why my Democratic colleagues and I want to reach an agreement, not only with the Republicans in this chamber, but we also need the president at the table. He prides himself for the art of the deal, and it's time for him to make a deal. We are working so hard to make sure that more than 20 million Americans who rely on the Affordable Care Act, it's called different things in different states. In my state, it's called MNsure, to access affordable health coverage. It tends to be a lot of individual buyers in the market. It tends to be a lot of small businesses. And over a quarter of the farmers in this country rely on it. Again, it's called different things in different states. But what it is a plan to allow people who maybe aren't at a big corporation to be able to have health care. A while back, they didn't even want to leave a big company, or if they were left without being at a big company or in the government or something like that, they couldn't even get health care at all. That's why the Affordable Health Care Act was passed. I'd make a lot of improvements to it, and we do have some opportunities to do that. But right now, we need to make sure that we don't push them off a health care insurance premium cliff. And this is on top of the draconian Medicaid cuts that are going to push 15 million people off their health care that were in the big, beautiful bill, and also the Medicare cuts, which no one intended to have $500 billion in Medicare cuts, I guess, of our colleagues on the other side. But the debt accumulated from the bill of $4 trillion was so big that it triggered automatic Medicare cuts, which are hitting and are going to hit rural hospitals, which they are now putting into their bottom line. And while they're staring that down and the Medicaid cuts, they're also looking at the fact that so many of their patients and people who visit rural clinics that often tend to be in the hospitals are on the Affordable Care Act, because rural areas, and I'm focused on rural areas because I just went on a 13-county tour in my state, rural areas tend to have more people that are small business owners, percentage-wise, and also that are farmers and ranchers. So this is not a December thing. This is not a January thing. This is a now thing, because those premiums are hitting when, on November 1st, when that market opens up. So right now, millions of Americans are staring down the reality that their health care premiums could double. For many families, that will mean making impossible choices to make ends meet or losing coverage altogether. This is preventable, but we have to act now. Over 20 million Americans are enrolled in Affordable Care Act health insurance plan. If we don't act, they're going to be forced to make impossible decisions. And that doubling number, that the premiums are going to double, came out of a study just this week by the Kaiser Family Foundation. If Congress doesn't come together in a bipartisan way to extend these credits, these families, farmers, ranchers, small business owners, entrepreneurs, seniors, people living in rural communities, will have to pay an average of double every month, hundreds of dollars more every month, not every year, every month, to keep their health insurance. In Minnesota, nearly 90,000 people will see their premiums increase by double digits. So you can say, well, I'm not on that kind of health care. I work in such and such company. You don't know the day, especially with these tariffs, when people are starting to get laid off at manufacturing companies like John Deere, or that a farmer's business goes bankrupt, his farm goes bankrupt because bankruptcies for small farms are at an all-time high in the last 5 years. You don't know when it's going to be you. It's like the lottery, especially right now with the crazy things going on in this economy. So even for people that aren't on the Affordable Care Act, this affects them. For many, this will put health care coverage out of reach. This is not political theater, I say to the president after he posted that offensive video. This is not a joke. These are real Americans that are facing these challenges. The loss of this tax credit will raise premiums for everyone. Minnesotans have already started to receive notice that their costs will increase. One constituent is bracing for more than a 27% increase in their premium next year. Another, whose husband's job was just eliminated, called the 19% increase in health insurance costs their family is facing incomprehensible with the loss of income that they already faced. And this is before adding in the extra costs people will be forced to take on if the tax credits are not extended. So if you noticed, I use those words 19 and 20, and you're thinking, well, she just said they double. This is before that happens. This is what's happening on the market right now because of a number of factors going on that the president should be dealing with. And people are going to be socked with this, smacked with this, right while the price of groceries has been going up. I think the president promised he was going to bring costs down on day one, and we're in something like day 255. And the opposite is happening. Anyone that goes in a grocery store and walks out, looks at their receipt, knows exactly what I'm talking about. Or people that are in the grocery aisle and see the cost of beef, they know what I'm talking about. Or people that get their electricity bill, they know what I'm talking about. Those aren't deep fakes. Those aren't fake videos the president puts up on Truth Social. Those are real bills. So especially as this is going on because of these tariffs, and could I just add, since I have the floor here, the latest, the tariffs on sofas and cabinets and lumber, it is already too expensive for Americans to buy a house or to rent a house or to rent an apartment. And now we're going to see major increases to home furnishings. And while we are in the middle of a housing crisis, it's literally one of the worst things he could do right now, but he did it. So all that is not nothing. All that kind of sets the stage for why the healthcare cost, which is one of the most expensive for people just on a yearly basis, is so devastating. One of my constituents shared that while they'd planned for higher premiums, they didn't expect a more than $2,000 increase for the same coverage next year. And like so many others, they were concerned that even if they switched to a cheaper plan, you know how that is, you're betting and you're trying to guess and estimate what's going to go wrong in your family, and is your kid going to have some kind of surgery or break a leg, Is your husband going to have some kind of health care checkup that'll be expensive? You got to always calculate those things. Like so many others, again, they were thinking, well, should I switch to a cheaper plan to save money and then hope I don't get sick? And then they would be more exposed to higher costs. Those are the kind of things people are doing right now. It's like the woman that Jean Shaheen had at a spotlight forum that we did this last week who had MS, and she had actually talked to her doctor about whether she could ration, kind of like people used to do with insulin with diabetes before we put those caps on insulin. Could she ration her medication for MS? And the doctor says, no, that's not how this works. It'll just grow the pressure in your brain and make your symptoms worse. Another Minnesotan wrote me that without the tax credits, their family of 4 would have to downgrade their health plan and spend significantly more on their health insurance than they do on their mortgage. Another said that he expected his family would have to pay an additional $16,000 per year for their health coverage if they had no health care tax credits. One Minnesotan shared, I cannot absorb additional costs and will be forced into a catastrophic plan if these reported double-digit increases go into effect. Just because someone can't afford to stay insured doesn't mean they need health care less. One of the things that I learned that maybe I hadn't thought through when I went to these rural hospitals was the fact that because there's a high percentage of these farmers and people in small towns on these plans, ours is called MNsure, like I said, they're already hit by the Medicaid cuts, right, the hospitals, the Medicare cuts, because it's an older population. But they actually cared a lot about this, the doctors, the nurses, the people running the hospitals, because they know that the people won't be able to afford this if these premiums double. They will choose not to get health care insurance. And then what will happen is they'll end up in their emergency rooms with hospitals that are already strapped thin, and they won't be able to afford, they will treat them, but they won't be able to afford it for a long period of time. So they time and time again mentioned to me that these affordable tax credits expiring or not being maintained would create a major problem. Already, approximately 1/3 of Americans report not taking medications as prescribed due to the costs. Jason from Pennsylvania was able to get life-saving coverage when he was diagnosed with thyroid cancer through the Affordable Care Act marketplace, and he said, it's only because of the premium tax credits that I've been able to afford that coverage. Now faced with the expiration of these credits, he understands the consequences for people like him. He said, if you're faced with a choice of bankruptcy or debt or saving your life, you're probably going to choose your life, Jason said. But the consequences of that, of having an immense amount of debt the rest of your life, could be ruined because of that. Another cancer survivor who has always made health insurance a priority also fears that unaffordable health insurance could mean for patients like her. And she says, it means that I don't have to wait around to find out about a disease that could have been cured if it had been detected soon enough. The insurance means I don't have to forego my entire life savings in my home because of medical bills. I don't have to forego life-saving treatment because I can't afford it, and that's all about to change. Without the tax credit, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford health care, the kind of health care that's going to save my life. Already, as I noted, because of Medicaid cuts that were passed in the big, beautiful betrayal of a bill, more than 300 rural hospitals, 200 health centers, and 500 nursing homes are likely to close. I'm going to be able to. This means less accessible care for rural communities, longer drives to access care, fewer places to seek care in an emergency, and more hours taken from work, caregiving, or other responsibilities. Fewer patients will go to that doctor's visit or get that life-saving screening. They will not get the surgeries they need. Many will get sicker. And ultimately, as I noted, more patients are going to end up in the emergency room, where these hospitals are going to have to take on the additional burden of more uncompensated care. None of this happens in a vacuum. As I noted, these Medicaid cuts And Medicaid provides health care for at least 1 in 5 rural Minnesotans, more than 31% of children in our state, and more than half of all nursing home residents across our state. So this is about seniors, people with disabilities, and kids, and that's why Medicaid's so important. For me, my dad, in his later years, got late onset Alzheimer's, and he was in one place and then we moved him to another place. But I knew the exact date when his savings were going to go away. And we were going into those savings, and sadly we lost him. But I knew that exact date because I was going to have to move him to another nursing home, another assisted living that took Medicaid, and I made plans with them. I knew that date. So many people in this country know that date, even if they're not a senior relying on Medicaid. Their kids, their spouses, their grandkids kind of know when that savings, if they had any savings to begin with, is going to run out. So Medicaid goes way beyond the individuals who have no savings at all. It actually helps people that do have some savings. It helps people that have worked their lives through, like my dad. Medicaid is there as a safety net for people. Over the last few months, I've heard from thousands of constituents, including seniors in Minnesota, from Sunrise Village in Malacca that I visited, to senior living in Watkins or Winona, to the Pillars at Prospect Park, and Episcopal homes in the metro. They are worried about their health care. I heard from one constituent from Inver Grove Heights who told me that Medicaid helps her to afford the cost of her father's memory care. I think about what a constituent told me who works with adults with disabilities. She is a mental health therapist for a woman who had a tracheotomy and is wheelchair-bound who requires nursing care. She's also the aunt of a man with Down syndrome with many needs who's in a residential home. She said, "I'm concerned about the possible Medicaid service cuts to the people who most need it." I've also heard from a constituent named Lola, whose daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. A social worker advised Lola that her employer-based insurance may not cover the cancer treatments her daughter needed and connected her with Medicaid. She said Medicaid helped completely with the surgeries, the T-cell therapy. Lola said using my own insurance would have caused a lot of delays because it would not have covered what she needed. And Robbie, who after years in an adult foster care facility now lives independently with a roommate because of Medicaid's disability waiver and community-based services. I've got to meet some of these incredible Minnesotans visiting care providers who help people with disabilities, thinking about the progress we've made so people can either live at their home or they can live in a group home and they can have jobs, and we just can't go backwards. People will feel the impacts of these cuts, and we know it. And I'll close with this. After learning that her insurance cost is set to skyrocket next year, a woman asked, "What can you in the Senate do to make sure I don't have to stop getting my insurance?" We can do something, and it's something that so many of my colleagues agree with, especially after the cuts that were made, especially after the bludgeoning tariffs, what they're doing to the cost of things for people. It's not going to fix everything, that's for sure, but it's going to save a lot of lives, and it's going to help people contain costs so they don't go over that cliff. As Minnesota's former senator, I have his desk, Hubert Humphrey once said, "The moral test of government isn't just how it treats the young and healthy. It's also how it treats the sick, the elderly, and people with disabilities." That's definitely true for us right now. And I believe this is a moral test for all Americans. At a time when so many families are struggling just to make ends meet, we can't sit back here and just play a blame game and look at the polls and We can do something. It's really pretty simple. We must work to protect Americans' access to health care. We must protect our rural hospitals. We must address our health care crisis. As I know, it's not a December or January problem, it's a now problem. And it's completely within our grasp to do this. and it's certainly within the president's grasp to bring his party with him. So stop, Mr. President, posting those fake offensive videos and start helping Americans with their health care. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 11:30 a.m. on Friday, October the 3rd, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal proceedings be approved today, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the 2 leaders be reserved for the use later in the day, morning business be closed, and notwithstanding Rule 22, the Senate proceed to executive session and resume consideration of SRS 412 post-cloture, and that all post-cloture time be expired at 1:30 p.m.
Without objection.
Mr. President, for the information of my colleagues, senators should expect a series of votes at 1:30 p.m. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 11:30 a.m. tomorrow.